I stand in my grandmother's elegant dining room wine, dripping from my face, as my sister Madison screams about my lies. The crystal glass lies shattered on the hardwood floor, while 30 family members stare in stunned silence. My mother Sarah clutches her chest, hyperventilating, while Uncle Robert mutters those devastating words. I guess we backed the wrong kid. But this moment of chaos at Grandma Dorothy's 79th birthday party was 25 years in the making. The story of how the family's forgotten son became their biggest surprise starts with a childhood filled with invisible tears. Growing up in suburban Cleveland during the late 1990s, I learned early that love in the Thompson household came with conditions I could never meet. My sister Madison, 2 years younger than me, seemed born with a spotlight that followed her everywhere she went. Meanwhile, I existed in the shadows, watching our parents, Sarah and David, pour their hearts' wallets and dreams into their golden child, while treating me like background furniture. The pattern started before I could even understand what was happening. When Madison turned 6, our parents threw her a princess-themed birthday party that cost more than some people's monthly mortgage payments. They rented a magician hired a pony for rides around our backyard and invited 50 kids from her kindergarten class. Pink streamers draped every surface of our house, and a professional photographer captured every moment of Madison's joy. She wore a custom-made tiara that sparkled under the party lights, and when she blew out the candles on her 3-tier cake, everyone applauded like she had just cured cancer. 2 months later, my 8th birthday arrived on a Tuesday. I woke up excited, expecting some version of the magical celebration Madison had received. Instead, I found my parents rushing around the kitchen packing Madison's lunch for school and discussing her upcoming dance recital. When I reminded them about my birthday, my mother looked genuinely surprised, as if the date had completely escaped her memory. My father mumbled something about being busy with work projects and promised we would celebrate over the weekend. That weekend never came. No party, no friends, no cake. Just another ordinary day where Madison's needs took priority over my existence. School became my refuge, the one place where my achievements might actually matter. I brought home straight A's on my report card, along with a certificate for winning the district-wide art competition. My 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had submitted my drawing of our neighborhood park, and somehow my 8-year-old perspective on the world had impressed the judges enough to earn 1st place. I burst through our front door that afternoon, waving the certificate and my perfect report card, ready to finally receive the praise I had watched Madison collect for simply tying her shoes correctly. My parents glanced at my achievements with the same enthusiasm they might show for the daily mail delivery. My mother said something about being proud, before immediately pivoting to Madison's finger painting project, which was hanging on our refrigerator at eye level. According to my parents, Madison's random splashes of paint on construction paper showed clear signs of artistic genius. They spent the next 20 minutes analyzing her masterpiece, discussing whether they should frame it or submit it to some imaginary art gallery. My certificate and report card ended up buried under a pile of Madison's school papers forgotten before dinner time. Christmas morning revealed the true depth of the inequality that governed our household. Madison's pile of presents reached nearly to the ceiling, a mountain of expensive dolls, designer clothes, electronic games, and toys I had never seen advertised on television. She unwrapped each gift with theatrical gasps of delight, while our parents recorded every reaction on their new video camera. My pile consisted of practical items that parents buy when they remember they have another child: socks, underwear, school supplies, and a single book about drawing techniques that cost less than one of Madison's many Barbie dolls. The professional family photos that our parents scheduled every year captured the dynamic perfectly. The photographer would spend 2 hours positioning Madison in different poses, adjusting her hair, and coaching her through various expressions. She was the star of every shot, the focal point of every composition. I stood awkwardly in the background, trying to smile, while the photographer barely acknowledged my presence. My parents constantly fussed over Madison's appearance, making sure her dress looked perfect and her smile looked natural. Meanwhile, I could have been wearing a clown costume and nobody would have noticed or cared. Dinner at restaurants became exercises in humiliation. Madison would throw spectacular tantrums if her drink came in the wrong colored cup, or if her food touched other food on her plate. Instead of correcting her behavior, our parents would frantically apologize to the waitstaff and order her dessert to calm her down. During one particularly memorable evening at a family restaurant, my parents became so focused on managing Madison's meltdown that they forgot to order my meal entirely. I sat quietly hungry, while Madison ate her way through an ice cream sundae, watching my parents celebrate her eventual return to good mood. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, seemed to be the only adult who noticed the stark difference in how my parents treated us. She would often invite me over for cookies and art supplies when Madison was receiving her latest round of attention and gifts. Mrs. Henderson had raised 4 children of her own, and she understood something about fairness that my parents had never learned. She would listen to my stories about school and look at my drawings with genuine interest, giving me the encouragement that I never received at home. My teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, tried repeatedly to involve my parents in my academic success. She called home about my high test scores, my helpful behavior in class, and my artistic talents. My parents would politely acknowledge her calls, but always seemed too busy with Madison's dance classes, pageant preparations, or social calendar to fully engage with my education. Ms. Rodriguez eventually stopped calling, though she continued to encourage me and challenge me with extra projects that she knew I would enjoy. The breaking point of that year came during a conversation I accidentally overheard between my parents in their bedroom. They were discussing the family budget, specifically the $3,000 they had spent on Madison's dance classes and beauty pageant entry fees. When my father mentioned that I had asked about art camp that summer, my mother immediately dismissed the idea, saying the $50 fee was too expensive and they could not afford extras right now. I stood in the hallway processing the mathematics of their priorities, $3,000 for Madison's hobbies versus $50 being too much for mine. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, finally understanding that the love and attention I craved would never come my way. My parents had made their choice about which child mattered, and no amount of perfect grades or good behavior would change their minds. The realization hurt worse than any physical pain I had ever experienced, but it also planted a seed of determination that would eventually grow into something they never expected. I stopped asking for things I knew I would never receive. I stopped hoping for birthday parties or Christmas presents or family photos where I mattered. Instead, I began focusing on the one person I could count on myself. I started saving every penny I could find, planning for a future where I would not need their approval or support. Even at 8 years old, I knew that someday I would prove my worth to the world, even if my own family never recognized it. By the time I reached 16, I had developed a thick skin and an independent spirit that my parents mistook for maturity. They praised me for being self-sufficient, never realizing that their neglect had forced me to become my own parent. Meanwhile, Madison, now 14, had grown into a teenager who expected the world to revolve around her wishes, and our parents continued enabling every entitled demand she made. The college preparation years revealed new levels of inequality that I had not thought possible. Madison struggled academically, barely maintaining a C average, despite having tutors for every subject. When her SAT practice tests showed scores that would not get her into community college. My parents immediately hired an expensive test preparation specialist who charged $200 per session. They scheduled Madison for twice-weekly sessions, and bought her every SAT prep book on the market, spending thousands of dollars to boost her scores into acceptable range. Meanwhile, I was achieving near-perfect grades and had scored in the 98th percentile on my practice SATs through self-study alone. When I mentioned wanting SAT prep materials, my father handed me a worn paperback book he had found at a garage sale and told me that smart kids like me did not need expensive help. I spent my evenings working through practice problems by myself, while listening to Madison complain about her tutor being too demanding, and her parents reassure her that standardized tests did not measure real intelligence anyway. The car situation provided another stark example of their double standards. Madison had been caught taking our parents' sedan for an unauthorized joyride, with her friends ending up in a minor fender bender that required $2,000 in repairs. Instead of facing consequences for her reckless behavior, she received a brand-new Honda Civic for her 15th birthday, 6 months before she was even legally allowed to drive it. My parents explained that Madison needed reliable transportation for all her activities and social commitments. When I turned 16 and asked about driving privileges, my father suggested I could take the bus to my after-school job at Henderson Art Supply. Mr. Franklin, the store owner, had offered me part-time work organizing inventory and helping customers with art projects. The job paid minimum wage, but it gave me access to art materials at cost and taught me valuable lessons about customer service and business operations. I took 2 buses each way to reach the store, spending nearly 3 hours daily in transit, while Madison cruised around town in her new car. Family vacations highlighted the continued favoritism in ways that no longer surprised me. My parents planned an extensive European tour for Madison's cultural education, spending weeks researching museums and historical sites that might interest their artistic daughter. They booked luxury hotels and first-class flights, documenting every moment of Madison's exposure to Renaissance art and classical architecture. The trip cost more than $15,000 and lasted 3 weeks during summer break. I was not invited on this cultural adventure. My parents explained that someone needed to stay home to watch the house and maintain my work schedule at the art store. They left me detailed instructions about watering plants and collecting mail, along with frozen dinners and $40 for groceries. I spent those 3 weeks working extra shifts, saving money, and enjoying the peace of having our house to myself for the first time in my life. Dating brought its own set of double standards that revealed my parents' true priorities. I had been seeing Emma Watson, an honor student from my chemistry class, who planned to study medicine at Stanford. Emma was intelligent, kind, and ambitious, everything I thought parents would want in a girlfriend for their son. When I brought her home for dinner, my parents barely acknowledged her presence, asking polite but superficial questions before turning their attention to Madison's latest social drama. Madison, meanwhile, had started dating Jake Porter, a 19-year-old high school dropout, who spent his days skateboarding and his evenings drinking beer behind the local shopping center. Jake had no job, no car, and no apparent plans for his future beyond hanging out with Madison. My parents welcomed him warmly into our home, praising his laid-back attitude and creative spirit. They even started giving Madison money for her dates with Jake, worried that she might feel embarrassed if she could not afford to go out with her boyfriend. The most revealing moment came during Madison's junior year college campus tours. My parents had scheduled visits to several universities, hoping to find schools that would accept Madison despite her mediocre academic performance. During our visit to a small liberal arts college in Ohio, the admissions counselor recognized my name from a letter of recommendation that my art teacher had submitted months earlier. Word about my portfolio had spread among faculty members, and they were eager to discuss scholarship opportunities for my senior year. My parents sat in stunned silence as the admissions counselor praised my artistic achievements and academic performance. They had been completely unaware that their other son had developed a reputation among college art departments throughout the region. The counselor asked why I was not applying to their program, and my parents fumbled through explanations about focusing on Madison's college search first. I realized in that moment that they had never bothered to learn about my goals, interests, or capabilities beyond the basic fact that I earned good grades and stayed out of trouble. The final betrayal of my high school years came when I discovered what had happened to my college savings account. Since age 12, I had been working various odd jobs around the neighborhood, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, babysitting, and eventually my regular position at the art store. My parents had insisted on holding my earnings in a special college fund account, promising that every dollar would be waiting for me when I graduated. I trusted them completely, and even felt grateful that they were helping me save for my future. During my senior year, I asked to see the account balance so I could plan my college budget accordingly. My mother became evasive, claiming the statements were stored somewhere she could not readily access. When I pressed the issue, my father reluctantly admitted that they had borrowed money from my account to pay for Madison's spring break trip to Cancun with her girlfriends. The $1,500 I had saved over 4 years of hard work had been spent on Madison's vacation, leaving my college fund completely empty. They promised to pay me back after Madison finished high school, but I knew that promise meant nothing. Madison would always have another emergency, another opportunity, another need that took priority over anything related to me. I realized that my independence was not just preferred, but absolutely necessary for survival. No one else was going to invest in my future, so I needed to take complete control of my own destiny starting immediately. That night, I sat in my bedroom calculating exactly how much money I would need for college and how I could earn it before graduation. I picked up extra shifts at the art store, started freelance graphic design projects, and applied for every scholarship available. Emma helped me research financial aid options, while her parents offered emotional support that my own family never provided. I was determined to succeed without asking my parents for another penny, knowing now that any dependence on them would only lead to disappointment and betrayal. High school graduation should have been a celebration of my achievements, but instead it became the final confirmation that I would never matter to my parents the way Madison did. I had earned valedictorian status through 4 years of academic excellence, artistic accomplishments, and leadership in student government. My graduation speech about overcoming obstacles and believing in yourself was deeply personal, though my classmates and teachers had no idea how directly it related to my family situation. My parents missed my valedictorian speech entirely. Madison had failed 2 classes during her senior year and needed to attend a makeup graduation ceremony at summer school to receive her diploma. My parents decided that Madison's emotional needs took priority over my academic achievement, so they skipped my graduation to support her through what they called a difficult time. I delivered my speech to a gymnasium full of families while scanning the audience for faces that were never going to be there. The scholarship announcement came at the end of the ceremony when the principal called my name for a full-ride academic and artistic scholarship to Ohio State University. My classmates cheered my teachers, applauded, and Emma's parents stood up to celebrate like I was their own son. I accepted the award alone, shaking hands with school board members who praised my dedication and potential. Later that evening, when my parents returned from Madison's makeup ceremony, they congratulated me with the same enthusiasm they might show for completing household chores. College funding became the next major crisis that revealed my parents' true priorities. Despite knowing about my scholarship, they had somehow assumed I would still need thousands of dollars for room and board textbooks and living expenses. When I asked about the college savings plan they had mentioned throughout my childhood, my mother confessed that no such fund existed. Every dollar they had intended for my education had been redirected toward Madison's failed private school experiment, her extensive tutoring, and her various extracurricular activities. They suggested I could take out student loans to cover my expenses, as if borrowing money was a perfectly reasonable solution to their financial mismanagement. My father handed me loan applications and encouraged me to think of debt as an investment in my future. Meanwhile, they were simultaneously researching expensive gap year programs for Madison, convinced that a year of traveling through Europe would help her discover her passion and prepare for college success. The final straw came 3 weeks before I was scheduled to leave for college. Madison had been working on her senior art portfolio, a collection of paintings and drawings required for her community college application. She had procrastinated for months, leaving most of the work until the last minute, despite my parents' constant reminders and offers of help. I had been working on my own portfolio for scholarship interviews, spending months perfecting pieces that showcased my technical skills and artistic vision. Madison destroyed my entire portfolio in what she later claimed was an accident, but what I knew was pure jealousy and spite. She had been drinking with friends in our basement and somehow managed to spill red wine across all 20 pieces of my artwork. Months of careful work were ruined in an instant, including original paintings that could never be recreated and drawings that had taken weeks to complete. My scholarship interview was scheduled for the following week, and I suddenly had no portfolio to present. When I discovered the damage, I confronted Madison about what had happened. She tearfully claimed it was an accident, insisting that she would never intentionally hurt me. My parents immediately took her side, suggesting that I was overreacting to a simple mishap. They blamed me for leaving my artwork where Madison could find it, as if I should have predicted that my sister might destroy my most important possessions in a drunken rage. My father actually suggested that maybe this setback would teach me to be more careful with my belongings in the future. The scholarship interview became an exercise in improvisation and desperation. I explained the situation to the admissions committee and showed them photographs of my destroyed work, along with earlier pieces I had stored at the art supply store. Mr. Franklin wrote a letter describing my artistic development and work ethic, and somehow I managed to maintain my scholarship despite the disaster. The committee was impressed by my ability to handle crisis and my commitment to my education despite family challenges they politely did not name. A week before my departure, our extended family staged what they called an intervention about Madison's behavior. Grandma Dorothy, Uncle Robert, and Aunt Linda had grown increasingly concerned about Madison's drinking, her academic failures, and her general lack of direction. They arranged a family meeting to discuss what everyone could do to help Madison get back on track and start making better choices about her future. The intervention quickly became another exercise in deflecting blame and making excuses for Madison's behavior. My parents explained that Madison was going through a difficult adjustment period and needed everyone's patience and support. When Uncle Robert suggested that maybe Madison needed to face some real consequences for her actions, my parents became defensive and started listing all the ways that family members had failed to understand Madison's sensitive nature and artistic temperament. Somehow the conversation shifted to focus on my role as Madison's older brother. My parents suggested that I had not been a good enough role model, that my academic success had put too much pressure on Madison, and that my independence had left her feeling abandoned and insecure. According to their twisted logic, Madison's problems were partially my fault for not being more supportive and encouraging toward my sister. I sat in stunned silence while my extended family watched my parents blame me for Madison's self-destructive behavior. Departure day arrived with little fanfare or emotion from my parents. They were busy planning Madison's gap year experience, researching programs that would help her explore different career options and find her true calling. Madison would spend the year traveling through Europe, taking art classes, learning languages, and discovering herself with full financial support from our parents. Meanwhile, I packed my belongings into a single suitcase and prepared to start college with whatever resources I could gather independently. Emma's parents offered to drive me to campus, understanding that my parents were too busy to make the trip themselves. As we loaded my suitcase into their car, I realized that I was not just leaving for college, but leaving my childhood family behind permanently. I could no longer pretend that my parents would ever prioritize my needs or recognize my worth. I was officially on my own, which was exactly where I had always been anyway. The drive to Ohio State felt like a journey toward freedom, rather than a painful separation. Emma held my hand in the back seat, while her parents asked about my plans and goals, showing genuine interest in my answers. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by adults who believed in my potential and wanted to see me succeed. I realized that family was not necessarily defined by blood relations, but by the people who chose to support and encourage you when you needed it most. College became the launching pad for a life I had never dared to imagine during my childhood years of neglect and disappointment. Ohio State University offered me not just an education, but a community of people who valued achievement, creativity, and hard work. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by professors and peers who recognized my potential and encouraged my ambitions without comparing me unfavorably to someone else. My double major in business and fine arts challenged me in ways that felt exciting rather than overwhelming. I discovered that I had a natural talent for understanding market trends and consumer psychology skills that complemented my artistic abilities in unexpected ways. My professors encouraged me to think of art as both creative expression and business opportunity, opening my mind to possibilities I had never considered during my isolated teenage years. During my sophomore year, I started a small graphic design consulting business from my dorm room. My roommate, Jason Miller, had connections with local businesses that needed marketing materials, and I could create professional designs at prices small companies could afford. What started as occasional freelance work quickly grew into steady income that covered my living expenses and allowed me to save money for the first time in my life without worrying about anyone else spending it. My rare visits home during college breaks revealed the continued dysfunction that I had temporarily escaped. Madison had returned from her European gap year adventure with no clearer sense of direction than when she left. She had enrolled in community college, but was struggling with basic coursework, and had already changed her major 3 times. Her drinking had escalated into what my parents euphemistically called anxiety issues, and they had enrolled her in expensive therapy sessions that seemed to produce no noticeable improvement in her behavior or outlook. During Christmas break of my junior year, I discovered that my parents had drained their retirement fund to pay for Madison's treatment at an exclusive rehabilitation center in California. The program cost $40,000 and promised to help Madison develop coping strategies for her emotional challenges and substance abuse issues. My parents spoke about the investment with the same optimism they had always applied to Madison's various endeavors, convinced that this latest expensive solution would finally unlock her hidden potential. Meanwhile, my own success remained completely invisible to my family. My consulting business had grown to include corporate clients and was generating more income than my father's pharmaceutical sales job. I had been featured in the university newspaper as an outstanding student entrepreneur, and my professors were encouraging me to consider graduate school programs at prestigious universities. None of these achievements registered with my parents, who seemed incapable of noticing anything that did not directly relate to Madison's ongoing crisis. I had stopped sharing details about my life during our brief phone conversations, offering only vague responses when my parents asked how school was going. They interpreted my lack of communication as typical college busyness and never pressed for more information. I realized that they had never really known me as a person anyway, so they could not tell the difference between my natural reserve and my deliberate emotional distance. My business continued expanding during my senior year as word spread about my design work and strategic thinking. I had hired several classmates as subcontractors and was turning down more projects than I could accept. Large corporations had started approaching me, directly impressed by my portfolio and my ability to understand their marketing goals. I was making more money than I had ever thought possible, while still maintaining my academic performance and preparing for graduation. The contrast between my success and Madison's continued struggles became even more apparent during family gatherings that I increasingly avoided. Madison had dropped out of community college and was living at home with no job, no goals, and no apparent motivation to change her situation. My parents had started telling extended family members that she was taking time to focus on her mental health and explore creative opportunities, euphemisms that fooled no one who knew the real situation. When Madison had what my parents called a nervous breakdown during my senior year, they contacted me frantically asking for a loan to cover additional treatment costs. They had exhausted their savings borrowed against their house and were facing financial ruin because of their continued efforts to rescue Madison from problems she had created for herself. They asked me for $10,000 with the promise that they would repay me after Madison recovered and started contributing to the family finances. The conversation revealed how completely my parents had misjudged both of their children. They had been telling extended family that I was struggling financially in college, while Madison was working toward finding her true calling. In their version of reality, I was the child who might need help someday, while Madison was simply going through temporary difficulties on her path toward inevitable success. They could not imagine that their neglected son had become financially stable while their pampered daughter had become completely dependent on their support. I declined their request for money, explaining that I was still a college student with my own expenses and uncertainties about the future. I did not mention that I could have easily afforded to help them, but chose not to enable their continued dysfunction. They seemed surprised by my refusal, as if they had expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to finally contribute to the family that had never contributed to me. During my final semester, I made the decision to minimize contact with my family after graduation. I loved them in the complicated way you love people who have shaped your life through their failures and limitations, but I could no longer pretend that our relationship was healthy or beneficial for anyone involved. I needed to build my own life free from their drama and dysfunction, surrounded by people who appreciated my strengths, rather than ignoring my existence. Graduation day arrived with little fanfare from my family, who were dealing with another Madison crisis, and could not attend the ceremony. I accepted my business degree and art degree alone, celebrating afterward with friends who had become my chosen family during 4 transformative years. Emma had been accepted to medical school, Jason was starting his own company, and I was preparing to launch my consulting firm as a full-time business venture in a new city where no one knew my history. The silent revolution I had started during childhood was complete. I had transformed myself from an ignored and neglected child into a successful young adult with unlimited potential and the skills to achieve whatever goals I set for myself. My parents had never noticed the revolution happening under their noses, too focused on Madison's problems to recognize the quiet strength and determination growing in their other child. Their loss would eventually become my gain in ways they could never have predicted. By my late 20s, I had built something my parents never could have imagined for their forgotten son, a thriving design firm that employed 20 talented people and served Fortune 500 companies across the country. Our Cleveland office occupied 3 floors of a downtown building, and we had just opened a satellite location in Chicago to serve our expanding client base. My business partner Jason and I had created exactly the kind of success story that business magazines love to feature. though my family remained completely unaware of our achievements. The transformation from neglected child to successful entrepreneur had happened gradually through years of hard work and strategic decisions that my parents never witnessed or understood. While Madison continued her cycle of failures and expensive rescue attempts, I had been quietly building an empire based on the independence and determination that their neglect had forced me to develop. Every contract we signed, every employee we hired, and every client we satisfied felt like evidence that their assessment of my potential had been catastrophically wrong. My personal life had stabilized in ways that felt almost surreal after the chaos of my childhood. I owned a spacious condominium in a historic Cleveland neighborhood, drove a reliable luxury car that I had paid for in cash, and maintained a social circle of accomplished friends who valued my company and counsel. The contrast with Madison's continued dependence on our parents could not have been more stark, though my family remained oblivious to how differently their two children had developed. Emma had completed medical school and was practicing as a resident physician in Boston, where she was already earning recognition for her diagnostic skills and compassionate patient care. We had maintained our friendship throughout college and beyond, talking regularly about our respective careers and occasionally visiting each other in our new cities. Her parents still asked about me whenever we spoke, showing more interest in my life and success than my own family had ever demonstrated. The real estate market had been particularly good to me during this period. I had started investing in rental properties during my mid-20s, using profits from my business to build a portfolio of residential and commercial buildings throughout Ohio. My accountant had suggested that I consider a major real estate acquisition that could serve both as investment and personal residence, something that would represent the pinnacle of my success and provide a foundation for the next phase of my business expansion. That suggestion led me to start seriously considering Manhattan real estate, an idea that would have seemed impossible during my childhood years of financial insecurity. I had visited New York several times for client meetings and had fallen in love with the energy and opportunities the city represented. The idea of owning property in Manhattan felt like the ultimate symbol of success, proof that a neglected kid from suburban Cleveland could compete at the highest levels of American achievement. My family's ignorance about my success had become increasingly obvious during the few occasions when I still attended family gatherings. Conversations typically centered around Madison's latest attempts at finding herself her ongoing therapy, and the various expensive programs my parents were funding to help her develop life skills and career direction. When relatives asked about my life, my parents would offer vague responses about me doing fine, but nothing particularly noteworthy or exciting. The disconnect became painfully clear during my cousin Tommy's wedding, which I decided not to attend despite receiving an invitation. I had client obligations that weekend, but the real reason was my reluctance to sit through another family event where Madison's problems dominated every conversation, while my achievements went unmentioned. My absence was noted by some relatives, but my parents made excuses about my busy work schedule without bothering to ask what kind of work kept me so occupied. Grandma Dorothy had started asking more pointed questions about why I rarely attended family events anymore. She was the one family member who had always paid attention to both grandchildren equally, and she seemed to sense that something was wrong with the family dynamic beyond Madison's obvious problems. When she called me directly to ask about my life, I gave honest but general answers about my business being successful and my personal life being stable and fulfilling. Uncle Robert, who worked in business himself, had started picking up on hints that I was doing better financially than my parents realized. During brief conversations at family events, he would ask specific questions about my work that suggested he understood more about business success than my parents did. I kept my answers modest and general, not wanting to create family drama, but also not wanting to lie about my accomplishments when directly asked by someone who seemed genuinely interested. The Manhattan opportunity arose through a client connection who knew about my interest in New York real estate. A penthouse apartment in a prestigious building had come on the market under circumstances that made it available for significantly less than its normal value. The seller needed to close quickly, and my financial position allowed me to make a cash offer that other potential buyers could not match. The property represented everything I had worked toward: location luxury and the kind of investment that would continue appreciating for decades. After viewing the apartment with my real estate agent, Anthony Garcia, I made the decision to purchase it as both an investment and a symbol of how far I had traveled from my childhood circumstances. The penthouse offered stunning views of Central Park, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and entertaining space that could accommodate business functions and personal celebrations. Most importantly, it represented freedom from the limitations that my family had tried to impose on my life and dreams. The purchase process was surprisingly straightforward once I committed to the decision. My business accountant handled the financial arrangements, while my attorney managed the legal details, and within 6 weeks I owned a piece of Manhattan real estate, worth more than my parents' house cars and retirement savings combined. I felt no need to announce this achievement to my family, knowing they would either not believe it or find some way to make it about Madison's needs and problems. Jason, who had become my closest friend and trusted business partner, was the first person I told about the Manhattan purchase. He was excited about the investment potential and the opportunities it might create for expanding our business into New York markets. We celebrated the purchase at a quiet dinner in Cleveland, toasting the success we had built together and planning the next phase of our professional partnership. As I signed the final papers and received the keys to my Manhattan penthouse, I realized that I had achieved something my family could never have imagined for their unwanted son. The neglected child, who had been ignored and dismissed, had become someone who could make major financial decisions without asking permission or borrowing money from anyone else. The contrast with Madison's continued dependence on our parents was so dramatic that it seemed like we had grown up in different families entirely. The irony was not lost on me that my success had been built on the independence and resilience that my parents' neglect had forced me to develop. Their failure to support or believe in me had accidentally created exactly the kinds of character traits that led to business success and personal fulfillment. Madison, by contrast, had been protected from every challenge and consequence, leaving her unprepared for the realities of adult life and independent decision-making. I decided to keep the Manhattan purchase private until I felt ready to share it on my own terms. The penthouse would serve as a retreat from my Cleveland business responsibilities and a base for exploring New York opportunities. Most importantly, it would stand as private proof that I had succeeded beyond anything my family thought possible for the child they had never bothered to understand or encourage. Grandma Dorothy's 79th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of her life and the family she had helped create. But I knew it would actually become another stage for Madison's ongoing drama and my parents' continued excuses for her behavior. I had not attended a major family gathering in nearly 3 years, using business obligations and scheduling conflicts to avoid the emotional exhaustion of watching my family's dysfunction play out in front of relatives who increasingly understood the truth about our family dynamic. But something about this particular invitation felt different. Maybe it was Grandma Dorothy's age, or maybe it was my own desire to finally stop hiding from the family that had shaped me through their neglect and favoritism. I decided to attend the dinner party, curious to see whether anything had changed and whether my extended family had started asking the right questions about why one grandchild was thriving while the other remained dependent on increasingly desperate parental support. The party was being held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Cleveland, a location that allowed for formal celebration without the casual chaos of someone's home. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a tailored suit that reflected my professional success, without being ostentatious about my financial situation. Most of the family was already seated around a large table when I walked in, and I could feel the surprise and curiosity that my appearance generated among relatives who had grown accustomed to my absence. Madison was already holding court at one end of the table, describing her latest artistic venture with the enthusiasm she had always been able to generate for projects that would ultimately fail or be abandoned. My parents flanked her like bodyguards, ready to defend her dreams against anyone who might ask practical questions about timelines, budgets, or realistic expectations for success. The familiar dynamic was so predictable that I almost turned around and left before anyone noticed I had arrived. Uncle Robert spotted me first and stood up to shake my hand, expressing genuine pleasure at seeing me after such a long absence. His wife, Aunt Linda, hugged me warmly and commented on how professional and confident I looked, asking about my work with the kind of specific interest that suggested she had been wondering about my life during my absence from family events. Other relatives welcomed me with similar warmth and curiosity, creating a pocket of conversation that gradually drew attention from the rest of the table. Grandma Dorothy beamed when she saw me, her face lighting up with joy that made me feel guilty for staying away for so long. She had always been the one family member who treated me with consistent love and attention, and her happiness at my presence reminded me that not all family relationships were based on competition and favoritism. I kissed her cheek and wished her happy birthday, promising to catch up with her properly after dinner when the crowd thinned out. The dinner conversation followed familiar patterns, with Madison's current projects and future plans dominating most of the discussion. She was working on what she called an art studio, though it sounded more like an expensive hobby space that my parents were funding while she explored different creative mediums without any particular focus or business plan. My parents described her work with the same optimistic enthusiasm they had always applied to Madison's ventures, emphasizing her artistic vision and creative potential rather than practical concerns about sustainability or profitability. As the evening progressed, the conversation naturally turned to real estate and housing costs, a topic that older relatives always seemed eager to discuss with younger family members. Aunt Linda mentioned that her daughter was struggling to afford rent in Chicago, while Uncle Robert complained about property taxes on their suburban home. The discussion provided an opening for what happened next, though I certainly had not planned to make any dramatic revelations about my personal finances. Someone mentioned the astronomical cost of Manhattan real estate, and the table fell into familiar complaints about how impossible it was for normal people to afford apartments in New York City. The conversation was casual and general, the kind of social discussion that happens at family gatherings, without any particular significance or deeper meaning. I was half listening while enjoying my dinner when Uncle Robert made a comment about young people being priced out of major cities entirely. Without thinking carefully about the implications, I mentioned casually that I had recently purchased a penthouse apartment in Manhattan. I said it in the same tone someone might use to mention buying a new car or booking a vacation, treating it as a normal life update rather than a dramatic announcement. I was not trying to create a scene or prove anything to anyone. I was simply participating in the conversation with an honest response to the topic being discussed. The reaction was immediate and intense. Madison's fork clattered onto her plate as she stared at me with disbelief and growing anger. My mother's face went pale as she processed what I had said, while my father looked confused, as if he had misheard my words or misunderstood their meaning. The casual family conversation stopped completely, as everyone at the table tried to determine whether I was joking or serious about such an extravagant claim. Madison was the first to speak, her voice rising with indignation as she accused me of lying for attention. According to her angry response, I was making up stories to upset her special day and steal focus from Grandma Dorothy's birthday celebration. She demanded that I stop telling ridiculous lies about buying expensive real estate when everyone knew I was just a struggling college graduate with student loans and entry-level employment. My parents immediately supported Madison's interpretation, asking me to explain what I meant by such an obviously impossible claim. They seemed genuinely confused by my statement, unable to reconcile their assumptions about my financial situation with the reality of what I had told them. My father suggested that maybe I was talking about a small studio apartment, or perhaps a rental property that I was considering anything other than the actual purchase of a Manhattan penthouse. The confrontation escalated when I calmly pulled out my phone to show them photographs of the property and documentation of the purchase. The penthouse was stunning in the pictures: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, elegant hardwood floors, modern kitchen with high-end appliances, and entertaining space that clearly represented luxury living. The real estate documents showed my name as the owner and confirmed the purchase price that made several relatives gasp audibly when they saw the numbers. Madison's response to this evidence was volcanic. She grabbed her wine glass and threw it directly at my face, screaming that I was a liar and an attention seeker who was trying to ruin her grandmother's birthday party with my ridiculous fantasies. The red wine splashed across my white shirt and dripped onto the restaurant's carpet, while Madison continued her tirade about my selfishness and cruelty toward the family that had always supported me. My mother burst into tears, overwhelmed by the revelation that her assumptions about both of her children had been completely wrong. She had spent years telling relatives and friends that Madison was the child with potential, while I was doing fine, but nothing remarkable. The evidence of my Manhattan purchase forced her to confront the reality that she had misjudged both of her children's capabilities and circumstances in ways that now seemed almost impossible to explain or defend. The restaurant staff appeared with towels and cleaning supplies, professionally managing the wine spill, while pretending not to notice the family drama playing out at their table. Other diners were staring at our commotion, but I felt strangely calm despite being at the center of the chaos. After 25 years of being invisible and dismissed, I had finally captured my family's complete attention in a way that could not be ignored or explained away. Uncle Robert broke the stunned silence by pulling out his own phone and Googling my name and business. What he found shocked him even more than the real estate purchase articles about my successful consulting firm profiles in business publications and a track record of professional achievement that spanned several years. He read portions of these articles aloud to the table, revealing accomplishments and recognition that my parents had been completely unaware of, despite their being readily available through simple internet searches. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Their neglected son had become exactly the kind of success story that parents usually brag about endlessly, while their pampered daughter remained dependent on their support for basic living expenses. The contrast was so dramatic that it forced everyone at the table to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about our family dynamic and the likely outcomes of different parenting approaches. Uncle Robert's final comment captured the moment perfectly. "I guess we backed the wrong kid." His words cut through the chaos and denial, forcing my parents to confront the truth they had been avoiding for decades. Their golden child had become a financial and emotional burden, while their ignored child had become independently successful beyond anything they had imagined possible. The revelation changed everything, and there would be no going back to the comfortable lies and assumptions that had governed our family relationships for my entire life. The silence that followed Uncle Robert's brutal assessment felt like the eye of a hurricane, a moment of stillness before the full impact of the revelation could settle over our family. 30 relatives sat frozen around the birthday table, processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Madison sat slumped in her chair, tears of humiliation streaming down her face as the reality of our reversed fortunes became impossible to deny. My parents looked like they had been physically struck, staring at me as if seeing their son for the first time in 28 years. Grandma Dorothy was the first to speak, her voice, gentle but firm, as she addressed the uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too shocked to acknowledge. She told the table that she had watched this family dynamic develop for decades, witnessing the favoritism and neglect that had shaped both of her grandchildren in drastically different ways. According to Dorothy, she had tried to compensate for my parents' blindness by giving me extra attention and encouragement whenever possible. But she had never imagined that their treatment would produce such dramatically different outcomes for their two children. Her words carried the weight of decades of observation and disappointment. She had watched my parents pour resources and attention into Madison, while ignoring my achievements and potential. She had seen me develop independence and resilience out of necessity, while Madison grew increasingly dependent on others to solve her problems and fund her lifestyle. Dorothy admitted that she had hoped my parents would eventually recognize their mistake and adjust their approach, but instead, they had doubled down on their favoritism, even as the evidence of its failure became increasingly obvious. The extended family began sharing their own observations about our family dynamic revelations that my parents had apparently been too absorbed in Madison's problems to notice or address. Aunt Linda mentioned that she had been concerned about my absence from family gatherings and had suspected that something was wrong with how my parents treated their children. Cousin Tommy admitted that he had tried to stay in touch with me independently because he valued our friendship and had never understood why my parents seemed so indifferent to my accomplishments. Uncle Robert, still holding his phone with search results about my business success, expressed amazement that my parents had been completely unaware of achievements that were documented in public business publications. He pointed out that any parent would normally be researching and bragging about their child's professional recognition. Yet somehow my success had remained invisible to the people who should have been most proud of my accomplishments. The conversation gradually shifted from shock and revelation to a more serious discussion about the long-term consequences of the parenting choices that had created this situation. Several relatives pointed out that Madison's continued dependence on my parents was unsustainable, given their approaching retirement and limited financial resources. Others observed that my success demonstrated exactly the kind of independence and capability that Madison needed to develop if she was going to survive as a functioning adult. Madison herself finally spoke up, her voice small and broken, as she admitted that she had been jealous of my confidence and independence for years, without understanding how I had developed those qualities. She confessed that she had always assumed that everything came easily to me, and that I did not need the same support and encouragement that she craved from our parents. The irony was devastating. She had resented me for possessing exactly the traits that our parents' neglect had forced me to develop, while their overprotection had prevented her from building those same survival skills. My parents struggled to articulate their own feelings and reactions to the evening's revelations. My mother kept apologizing through tears, saying that she had never meant to neglect me and had always assumed I was fine because I never complained or asked for help. My father admitted that they had been so focused on Madison's problems that they had failed to recognize my strengths and achievements, treating my independence as evidence that I did not need their support, rather than understanding it as a response to their lack of attention. The most painful part of their response was how defensive they became when relatives started questioning their parenting decisions more directly. Instead of accepting responsibility for the favoritism that had damaged both of their children, they tried to explain their choices as reasonable responses to Madison's neediness and my apparent self-sufficiency. They could not see that their differential treatment had actually created the very problems they were trying to solve, making Madison more dependent while forcing me to become emotionally distant. Uncle Robert suggested that the family needed professional help to address the dysfunction that had been revealed so dramatically. He recommended family therapy as a way for everyone to process the hurt and resentment that had been building for decades and to develop healthier communication patterns going forward. Several other relatives supported this suggestion, pointing out that the current family dynamic was clearly unsustainable and harmful to everyone involved. I found myself in the strange position of being the most composed person at a table full of crying and arguing relatives. The confrontation that I had never planned or wanted had finally forced my family to acknowledge truths that I had been living with for 25 years. While the revelation was painful for them, it was actually liberating for me to finally have my reality validated by people who had witnessed our family's dysfunction, but had never felt able to address it directly. The evening ended with tentative plans for family therapy sessions and a commitment to more honest communication about everyone's needs and feelings. Madison asked if we could talk privately about how she could start building the kind of independence and self-reliance that I had developed despite our parents' different treatment. My parents requested time to process what they had learned and to figure out how they could repair the damage their favoritism had caused to both of their children. Grandma Dorothy pulled me aside before I left the restaurant, expressing her pride in who I had become, despite the obstacles my parents had created. She apologized for not intervening more forcefully when I was younger, explaining that she had hoped my parents would recognize their mistakes without outside pressure. She also revealed that she had been setting aside money for my future for years. Money that she wanted to give me now as recognition of my achievements and as compensation for the support I should have received from my own parents. The family therapy sessions that followed were difficult, but ultimately healing for everyone involved. Dr. Rebecca Martinez helped us understand how parental favoritism affects entire family systems, not just the children who are directly targeted. Madison learned to recognize how our parents' overprotection had actually handicapped her development, while my parents began to understand how their assumptions and biases had shaped their treatment of both children in harmful ways. The most important breakthrough came when Madison asked me to help her develop a realistic plan for becoming financially independent. She wanted to learn the business and life skills that I had developed through necessity, and she was finally ready to take responsibility for her own future, instead of depending on our parents to solve her problems. I agreed to mentor her while maintaining appropriate boundaries about what kind of support I was willing to provide. My parents made genuine efforts to treat both of their adult children more equally, though the process was awkward and sometimes painful as they tried to unlearn decades of established patterns. They started asking about my business and personal life with real interest, and they began setting clearer boundaries with Madison about what kind of financial support they would continue providing. The changes were gradual and imperfect, but they represented real progress toward healthier family relationships. Emma and I reconnected during this period of family healing, and our friendship gradually developed into something deeper as we both navigated our successful careers and personal growth. She had always understood the family dynamics that shaped my childhood, and she provided emotional support during the difficult process of rebuilding relationships with my parents and sister. Her parents continued to treat me like family, offering the kind of consistent love and encouragement that I had rarely experienced growing up. Madison's transformation was the most dramatic and encouraging result of our family's crisis. She enrolled in business classes, found part-time work, and began developing realistic career goals based on her actual interests and abilities, rather than fantasies about overnight success. She still struggled with the independence and confidence that I had been forced to develop early, but she was making genuine progress toward self-reliance with appropriate support from family therapy and career counseling. The life lessons that emerged from our family's confrontation with reality were profound and lasting. I learned that success achieved through independence and hard work provides satisfaction that external validation never could. My parents learned that loving children equally means supporting their individual strengths rather than trying to compensate for perceived weaknesses through different treatment. Madison learned that genuine self-worth comes from personal accomplishment rather than family protection from consequences and challenges. Most importantly, we all learned that it is never too late to change destructive family patterns if everyone is willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to healthier approaches. The favoritism that had defined our family for decades was replaced by genuine respect for each person's individual journey and achievements. The ignored child had become the family success story, while the pampered child was finally learning to develop her own strength and capability. The Manhattan penthouse became a symbol of possibility rather than division, representing what anyone can achieve when they take responsibility for their own future and refuse to accept other people's limitations on their potential. I offered to let Madison stay there while exploring career opportunities in New York, giving her a chance to experience independence in a supportive environment where she could develop confidence without the safety net that had prevented her previous growth. Our family dinners became opportunities for genuine connection rather than performances of dysfunction. My parents shared their pride in both children's accomplishments, while Madison and I developed the sibling relationship we had never been allowed to have during our childhood years of competition and favoritism. Grandma Dorothy lived to see her family heal from the wounds that favoritism had created, and she remained proud of both grandchildren for their willingness to grow and change. The story of the pampered princess and the ignored son became a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of parental favoritism, but also a hopeful example of how families can heal when they choose honesty over comfortable lies. Success achieved through independence and perseverance proved more valuable than success handed to someone without effort or struggle. The family that had backed the wrong kid learned to appreciate both of their children for different but equally valuable qualities. As I reflect on this journey from childhood neglect to adult success, I realize that my parents' failure to support me actually gave me the greatest gift possible: the knowledge that I could create my own future, regardless of other people's beliefs about my potential. Their favoritism toward Madison taught me that external validation is unreliable and temporary, while personal achievement based on hard work and integrity provides lasting satisfaction and genuine self-worth. The wine glass that Madison threw at my face during Grandma Dorothy's birthday party shattered more than just crystal. It shattered the illusions that had governed our family relationships for decades. From those broken pieces, we built something stronger and more honest, a family that values each member's individual journey and celebrates everyone's achievements without comparison or competition. I hope my story encourages you to think about the children in your own life and how your support, attention, and expectations shape their development. Every child deserves to feel valued and encouraged, regardless of whether they fit into their parents' expectations or dreams. Sometimes the quiet kids who seem fine on their own are actually the ones who need recognition and support the most. Have you ever witnessed favoritism in your own family or community? How do you think parents can better support all of their children's individual strengths without creating competition or resentment between siblings? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more content about family dynamics and personal growth, and share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding how childhood experiences shape our adult lives. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it inspires you to believe in your own potential regardless of who does or does not recognize it. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's attention or approval, but by your own commitment to growth, kindness, and authentic success.